And off we go. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this panel, in quotes. um, and thank you all for agreeing to be part of this discussion. And I hope that within the next 30 to 45 minutes, we will have something really nice to share with the social work students. So I'm going to start by asking people to introduce themselves and just with your name, what you do, and any other information you want to share. Maybe something funny. Yes. We are recording. I'm using a pen up to do the recording.
Very cool.
Whoever wants to go first.
Maybe I'll go just because I see myself right beside you on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm Nmesoma. I'm a PhD student of clinical psychology at McGill. I'm Nigerian, as is Prince. I'm Igbo, as is Prince. And I grew up in Nunavut. So, for me, when I think about this topic that we're here to talk about a lot, I really do think of the intersection of like Blackness, indigeneity in different places. So yeah, that's what I'm coming in with.
Thanks. Ash, you are the next on my side. So let me just keep it going.
Hi, my name is Arshad. I am a PhD student at the University of Toronto. I study Black Canadian history and I look at liberation movements in Southern Africa. So how Black Canadians are involved in liberation movements. I'm South African. And so, talking about liberation movements is something that's very close to my heart. I was heavily involved in activism in the city of Toronto, and that kind of inspired my master's project that looked at police violence on Black life and the history of that, documenting it from 1960 on until the present day. When we talk about anti-Black racism, one of the things we need to understand is the long history of that has occurred in Canada. But also the way that we depict violence on Black bodies is not just something that needs to be kind of voyeuristic.
Thank you. Timi.
Hi, my name is Timi Idris, and I am a PhD student in health at Dalhousie University. I'm also the manager of the Promoting Leadership and Health for African Nova Scotians program at Dal that aims to increase the representation of Black people in health professions.
Thank you. And finally, Vena.
Hi, my name is Vena. I'm a PG student in global health at the University of Montreal, and I study disease prevention, disease control, and international cooperation for public health interventions in low and middle income countries. I'm from Haiti, and I have been involved in the health science space for 10 years now. And, working in public health, working in medical institutions, there is a heavy baggage of the legacy of colonialism and the legacy of anti-Black racism and a lot of the stuff that we take for granted in medical research. And so when I think about anti-Black racism, I go immediately to scientific institutions and I go immediately to the history of some of the experiments that were conducted on vulnerable people, Black people in the United States and throughout the world, and low-income countries and the Caribbean and Africa. And so this is where my interventions are going to be directed at. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's going to be an exciting conversation, I think.
Thank you. Well, I feel intimidated because of what you people do. So thank you for bringing your expertise to this conversation. So the first question I have is when anti-Black racism is mentioned, what should people know? What is the first thing that comes to mind? Because we talk a lot about anti-Black racism. And just like a lot of things that's become a buzzword in Canada, sometimes it loses it doesn't generate the emotions that it should anymore. So when we talk about anti-Black racism, what comes to mind? Yeah, Ash.
I think we need to like pause on the term anti-Black racism, because I think we've kind of become numb to it. I think ever since the murder of George Floyd, there's been this kind of, I talk about it a lot in terms of this cultural awakening, it's an awakening or this resurgence. And I always look at them and I'm like, it's not ours. Like we know this has been going on for a minute. Like, it doesn't mean that we have to have this cultural awakening. I think the other thing, like I was saying earlier, is also we need to understand that, Vena brought it up, Nmesoma brought it up, Timi brought it up. It's not just racism towards Black people is not just in one specific context. I mean, I look at, the criminal component and the legal system, how unjust that is, it's broadly spread around everything. And the other thing is, there's also this weird notion of like microaggressions. That's to me, that just doesn't make sense. Like, there's no small racism, right? So if you're out there, with your own stereotypes or using stereotypes to answer a question, it's racist. Like, you don't get a pass because you don't fully understand it.
Thanks. Any other person? Yeah, Vena.
Yeah, I'll go. I think when I think of the term anti-Black racism, I do agree with Ash that I feel like it is a bit overused. And like you said, Prince, people stop listening after a certain point. Like, they don't want, like, it feels like you're getting bashed over the head with a term that becomes a buzzword and it loses its potency. But to me, I always end up thinking back at the structural features of racism and how it manifests on individual level. I tend to think about systems and how systems are built and constructed by people with biases. And those biases are going to have an impact on the policies that influence people differentially based on their race, based on their skin color, etc. And those have real consequences on a physiological level. Like, oppression has physiological consequences on individuals. And so I tend to look at what features of the system can be modified or can be adjusted to account for those biases. And I feel like it's a more constructive use of energies and time to see how you can counterbalance some of those very, very powerful influences that people have put in place, and maybe they don't realize how it affects different people. And so trying to focus on that rather than just using a buzzword as a throwaway and thinking mentioning the word fixes the problem.
Yeah. Thank you. Nmesoma.
Yeah. So I think, on this kind of term conversation a little bit, like, I also kind of feel like the term anti-Black racism is at least losing the utility that it should and could have had, and I also think that, like, my go-to replacement is just kind of like white supremacy. Like, let's say it. And it also seems like it talks, to me, that's a term that talks about what is the function of this racism. It's to make sure white people, white institutions, white neighborhoods, white, ways of doing things are and remain supreme, dominant over everything else. And so I like that term a lot more. And then kind of also in a way, like, thinking about what Vena said, for me, when I think about, like, what is anti-Black racism, especially, like, in the field of, like, mental health, psychology, whatever, which is also very much at a crossroads with or intersecting with, like, the legal system. Like, I think just about, like, for example, I was talking to some folks about a practicum I'll be doing soon, and just the ways that, like, the family mental health is used to pathologize people, youth, people in or peripheral to the criminal justice system in ways that, like, the bias is just so clear, like, you can literally give psychologists or experts two of the same profile, and you just change a name and you change a neighborhood, and suddenly the outcome and what they're funneled into looks so much different. The family court system, the way, you know, certain families are pathologized and disallowed the right to raise their children or to all these different things. So yeah, those are the things that come up to me, and obviously housing comes up to me because that's part of my research, and just like the ways that, like, I mean, I don't know, I'm very disillusioned with Canada's housing policy in general, if we can even say we have one. But particularly if you're going to be talking about like poor and racialized people, like it's just kind of out the window at that point. And so, yeah, those are the things that come up to me, like housing and the way that like mental health or diagnoses are combined with criminalization are two of the big things that come to me. And again, those things both happen on, you know, on some of the most devastating forms, where someone, you know, dies in detention, or a kid is, you know, shuffled around to several foster homes or whatever. But it also happens in the way that people, like in the, let's say, more privileged spaces that like that we get to navigate, where we as Black people are diagnosed and labeled as various different things at various different times. Anyway, so those are the things that come up for me.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think I forgot to say what I do for research when I was introducing myself. So my background is in sociology and criminology, but now I'm doing my PhD in health, and I look at the well-being of Black women that work in nonprofit organizations. And when people ask me how do you come from sociology to criminology to health, I try to take it back to I study social problems, especially social problems that affect Black people disproportionately. So I study things like unemployment, anti-Black racism, housing, but also the health system. And I agree with what everybody has said here. I feel like anti-Black racism has been overused. And that's what I'm even saying in my research right now, how that word, that buzzword, and the EDIE of it all is also being used, put more pressures on us to overperform and overproduce and be the spokesperson. And no one is thinking about how that affects our well-being. And currently, right now in Halifax, we have a boil water advisory right now. They're telling us not to drink the water. And it also reminds me of environmental racism too. Dr. Ingrid Waldron worked on a book called There's Something in the Water. I hope I'm getting the name of the book correctly, but how Halifax, Nova Scotia is the place with the largest and oldest Black population in Canada, but how entrenched racism is into the structures of the society. Sometimes when we think about anti-Black racism, sometimes it seems as Ash said, on an individual level about these things that are called microaggressions, but they're not micro, they're macro. It affects us very it starts from even where people are born, all the way to what schools they go to, all the way to the work that I even do as the work that I do to increase the representation of Black people in health professions, how insidious it is. And those are the things I think about.
Thank you so much. I feel you, the subsequent questions that I have, you have touched a little bit of it. So, but the next question I have is, I remember I was having a discussion with someone recently, and we were talking about how Canada has really good PR. Outside of Canada, people really think that Canada is this multi-ethnic and multiracial paradise where everything is well, right? And when you also think about it, even within Canada, there are a lot of people who believe that this is the reality of Canada, but that's not what we experience. So my next question is, I know you've alluded to some of this, but how do a lot of Black people experience racism in? I don't want to put you on the spot and say how have you, but if you want to share your own experience, that's fine. But in general, how do Black people experience it in our everyday life?
I think I can go, and you ask a very interesting question, very deep question, especially as I am an immigrant. And through economic immigration, because that's another thing too. Most of us, or some of us move here not because we're refugees from somewhere. People say we chose to move here, not thinking about colonialism and also imperialism and how that has put us to move from some of our countries, but that's a conversation for another day. But when I think about those things, it's like how this mixed bag of things, in the sense that I'm happy to be here, but also very critical about the structures of the society. And when you speak up, there's that like, but you should be grateful. And there's that like, there are all those feelings and emotions inside me, like how do I manage this thing? How do I speak? Like when you started asking the question, I'm like, oh my god, this is recorded. But yeah, I think it just goes through like the things that we face and how we face it. Like personal stories, but also like things that I hear in the various spaces that I'm into. Just talking about the health system, because that's where I am mostly in, how we have to like show up and advocate for ourselves. And for me personally, I had to get a surgery done, and how I had to like advocate for myself, which I did not have to do in that sense, because they should have taken me seriously in the first place. But also in the education system too. And I think of people that are the first in their families to go to schools, and how their guidance counselors, no one in their schools are telling them that you can do this. Their schools are literally telling them that you can't do this. This is not for you. This is not the path for you. And I face that like every day in my work, where people are telling me, oh, are you sure I can do this? And I'm like, yes, you can, just try. But nobody has told them that before. And I think about like those two things are like the forefront things for me when I think about like what we face.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's very insightful. Any other thoughts? Yes, Vena.
Yeah, I'm also an immigrant, and a lot of what Timi has said echoes with me. Because I'm from Haiti, which is a majority Black country, and moving back and forth from Haiti to North America, either in Canada or the US, and you see like subtle changes in how people interact with you, that you never really have to give a second thought to when you're back home. And just like Jimmy, I do feel a little bit bitter that, you know, I emigrated for my professional advancement, right? I wanted to go into higher education. And I am very interested in the conversation of the intersections of imperialism with racism, because why can't I just get a higher education degree in my own country? Why do I have to move to Canada? Why does having a degree from Canada have greater weight in Haiti than having a degree from Haiti, you know? So that's also part of the conversation. And I think it also, and my own personal experiences and, you know, the Eastern US and in Canada the way it manifests itself is in people being condescending in a way, or extra nice.
Yeah.
They're like, oh my gosh, you're from Haiti. Wow. It's so impressive what you're doing and things like that, which is, you know, it's slightly annoying, but, you know, whatever. And the other thing I think of is the extra burden that comes with it, right? Because life is hard, life is complicated, our jobs are hard, like things are not getting any easier, and that's for everyone. But when you have to deal with racism in your everyday life, it takes on an additional toll on you that limits how much energy or how much focus you can dedicate to what truly matters. So then you get distracted fighting off all these extra things that have nothing to do with what your purpose should be or what your work should be. But now you're like on EDI committees and you have to deal with this and you have to explain to people why they should not say certain comments or why they should, you know, be more understanding of people's differential circumstances. And that takes work, that takes energy. And that's energy that you cannot then put into what you're supposed to be doing. And that I think about that a lot. I think about that additional burden a lot because, you know, the energy and the willpower and the time has to come from somewhere. and it subtracts from what really matters, I think. And it's very, it's a shame.
Yeah. Thank you. Mesa.
Yeah, I think as both of you two were speaking, a lot of different things came to my mind, and that, like, again, like so much of both in my manifested in my own personal life and those close to me, like racism, anti-Black racism looked like what places you could have access to for housing, you know, especially if you were low income, but then also what places that you could feel safe in. You know, I was reading this researcher who studied sort of like policing, particularly in the States, and like different policing in different parts of different cities, because that's a big part of how racism manifests. Like the cops in the rich neighborhood are the people that you can call to actually, you know, protect and serve, and they'll come on time and all this stuff. Cop in the, you know, poor, bad part of the city will do something completely opposite. But like even that, so let's say you can afford, there's multiple studies on this. Let's say you can afford, you know, a Black family can afford a place, a house in whatever, in a nicer neighborhood with a nicer school and whatnot. They'll still more often than not choose to live in a different part of town because there's this story. This researcher was at her door to her home, to her condo, I guess, with her suitcases, just coming back from out of town, fiddling to find her key. You know, 5 minutes into fiddling to find her key, a cop, you know, appears and is asking, "Oh, do you live here? What are you doing here?" Blah, blah, blah. And so, like, it's both the, you know, what can you have access to in terms of, you know, the resources you might have, but also what places and spaces will make you feel like you can live there as a neighbor, you know, as a part of that neighborhood. I also think a lot to my educational experiences. So I was also born outside of this country, but I came as an infant. And so my whole life has been in this place. And the experience of being like subtly and sometimes not so subtly pushed out of various, you know, educational tiers that I could attain, I had the ability to attain, but having folks kind of, and couple that with, again, some of the surveillance that my family, or the assumed danger or inadequacy of my parents, that like all these sorts of things where honestly there were certain moments, especially looking back and reflecting, where it's like these people, whether consciously or not, were trying to mold my life into the statistic of a Black life that they thought is how it should be. I think, again, this is why I don't shy away from using the word white supremacy, because I think it's just what the outcome is. And then now I think in my present life, a lot of the things, or especially in later years, it becomes, again, the very rigid view of Black people as labor, as a source of labor, whether it's extra like labor in terms of like, yeah, all these other responsibilities that people have already talked about, but also just kind of like, again, the classic, like you have to work 2 times harder for half as much. Like you have to go and you have to be John Henry at all times, just to prove yourself, and that whatever you labor, particularly now in this like university grad school thing, that becomes ours. Like, you know, your achievement becomes McGill's. And you need to do whatever you need with very much less support than others. And the other thing that I would also deign to call like white supremacy and anti-Black is, especially now in, you know, let's say some of my practicum placements or even in my research, although my research supervisor is super cool, there's this complete lack of knowledge about, let's say, what are Indigenous worldviews and Black Indigenous worldviews around what mental health is and around what treatment is. And so not only do the people that I am seeking this knowledge from, that I'm paying to get this knowledge from, don't know those things, can't advise me on those things, can't supervise me on those things. I have to, if I actually want to get the education that I need, that I require, I need to find a way to do that. No extra support, no help, no anything. And even if I do that and am doing that successfully, those knowledges aren't recognized within the system, right? So like those are all things like that's a huge hobbling of my competence and the competence of the whole domain, like the whole discipline in general. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I'm facing and dealing with right now.
Thank you. Before I go to Ash, while you were speaking, I remember the conversation I was having with someone on how white supremacy presents itself in different spaces. And we talked about how, like, in our world today, subconsciously, people assume, like, white men are competent. So, like, that's why they get into certain positions. Like, subconsciously, like, it has been ingrained in them. And the same way, like, anti-Black racism manifests itself in how people think of the competence of Black people, right? Like, I was even reading a piece that was talking about how soccer coaches do not like having Black players in the midfield in big football teams because they feel like Black players only have energy to run and do stuff like that. So, like, racist, how it manifests in this space, like different spaces, it's fascinating. Ash.
I think what you said about multiculturalism in Canada is something that we need to kind of address on a regular basis, right? This whole notion that Canada is multicultural is like a justification that is used by white supremacy to combat racism, right? So you can't experience something racist because we're a really multicultural country, right? I mean, I grew up in Toronto, in Scarborough, which is like a highly diverse neighborhood, predominantly Black. And anything that happened in that neighborhood would be kind of combated with, oh, no, it's just a bad act from police. You know, we're still a multicultural country. You know, we let you come to this country, so, you know, you need to be grateful. And I think I look back at it, I mean, I'm 6'1" and like 180 pounds. So I'm relatively like a larger individual. And I'm been carded numerous times by police. And that's just simply walking down the street and the police in Toronto can ask you for your ID. And you know right off the bat, you know, you're going to get put into a system and you're registered in that system. And they don't have to give you any reason, right? I think the other thing that we need to start addressing, especially in our roles, is this notion to, and Nmesoma, I think, if you remember, I said it to Phil Wong, was this notion to push back. Everything is the United States. Everything is the United States. You know, we don't start by looking at what's happening here. We'll be like, oh, you know, Trayvon Martin was the beginning of Black Lives Matter. But Devontae Miller lost his eye. There are actually specific cases here where we can look at the racism that occurs in Canada. It doesn't have to be in contrast to the United States. And I also think that we need to look at like the use of language, right? If we look at, I mean, Toronto, like now there's an increase in gun violence. It's a metropolitan city. There's going to be violence, right? There's income inequality. When that happens, there's going to be an increase in crime. But the way that the language is used, for example, if somebody gets shot in Scarborough, it's gang violence. If somebody gets shot in like a white neighborhood, it's a mental health crisis. And that's something that occurs here too. And, you know, going back to what Timi said, I think you all know I went for an operation. One of the most striking things I ever experienced is I was giving blood work. And I was giving the whole gamut of blood work. And this woman turned to me and she goes, have you taken your retrovirals? And I was like, pardon? And she's like, have you taken your retrovirals today? And I'm like, no. I'm like, I'm here to donate something. And I was like, oh, you think I have AIDS? Oh, it's because I'm South African and I'm doing a whole bunch of blood work. And I sat there for like a minute and I was like, this is ridiculous. Like the insanity behind this entire notion that you had the gall to ask me if I had taken retrovirals and to assume that I had AIDS was just astonishing to me.
Thank you. While I was constantly looking at the time and thinking about all the questions I still have. We were in some of us were in Harvard together, and we saw what happened in Harvard. But then the interesting thing that happened to me was that I went to McGill from there for a conference, and this wonderful Black scholar gave a presentation on anti-Black racism in women's healthcare. And it got me thinking that there is a huge intersection of gender and racism. And like the way men experience anti-Black racism is quite sometimes different from how women experience anti-Black racism and even non-gender binary. So wanted to hear your thoughts on like how that happens, like, yeah, like the intersection of gender and anti-Black racism. Yeah. Yes, Ash.
I think you and I have had this conversation, and I think most of us have as well. I go back to speaking about, I was thinking about Vena and Nmesoma and Timi said regarding labor, right? And if we look in let's just use our specific, institutions that we're in, the majority of the women that we turn to as Black scholars are Black women. And I think to myself, especially my mentors at York, how they told me walking into their office, they don't have 9-to-5 jobs as other white professors do. And this is Black women specifically. They have multifaceted jobs. They would come in there with a student like me and they're like, okay, we have to get you caught up before you go to your master's. Okay, you're a parent. We need to make sure you have this kind of funding. Okay, we also need to deal with, being carded or the racism that you're experiencing. So for me, when I look at education and the Institute, Black women take on a lot of labor that first of all, is not compensated for. Right. And it's just assumed that these Black women are supposed to do those things. But at the same time, as Black men, where would we be without them in the academic sphere?
True.
Yeah, I think Arsha said it all, because that's literally what my research is on, the labor aspect. And when I talk to like Black women about my research, they're like, you should do it in academia. That would be important. Because as you said, it's like you're being paid for one thing, but the other things that you do, like the emotional support that you have to give, like I think about my supervisors. Like I feel like every Black student that wants to do their PhD goes to them. So they have so many Black students that I do not think they can say no to, because and I think Nmesoma mentioned this about like, you have to be present, you have to be there. And Vena also mentioned it about this additional labor, and also like, you're not thinking about yourself or what you want to do. You're thinking of the community. You're thinking like, you know what? I'm the only Black faculty here. I have to show up and show out. I have to produce, and I have to support the other people. How we say, not looking for a seat at the table, but crashing the table and building your own table. And I think like that labor, that's what I think about. But I also think about Black men too. And to some of the things that Ash said too, like how the world sees them in that sense. It's like just at face value, some of the things that they experience, and also why they're not as present in some of the spaces that where we as women are navigating, and the history behind those things. I said some non-words in there, but I'm sure you know what I'm trying to say.
Thank you. Thank you for the non-words. Any other thoughts?
I want to add, like, and, from my experience of being, close to Black people who don't fit or are readily read as part of a strict gender binary, and the way, and again, bringing, I think, a lot back to like a lot of the psychologizing of gender and sexuality, and this, it really comes to mind. But this idea of like, if you're in a Black body that's not easily read as all these different subcategories, so that you can be appraised for your utility in, whatever white supremacist system you're trying to navigate, it can be just so threatening. So like that level of isolation, and that level of like, really there's I think, like, to the extent that like all Black people, all Black bodies are looked at as these objects, like detestable objects. Yep. These folks, Black folks who refuse to be a part of like the gender system as well as the race system, that can be like so traumatizing to the body, like the trauma that is, put on to those folks. And I think especially like when I think about like, yeah, if we're adding some of these layers, like these intersectional layers there too, it's really important to me to think about like the ways that like, if we all know that we're facing like this racism thing, how can we protect those who are like, who we already know are being read as even more, you know, deviant and not compassion deviant or like this,
Yeah.
you know, very compassion deviant that a lot of non-binary people or gender non-conforming people have, but who are all like from jump going to be read as very pathological and dangerous. Like they have the horrible sort of dyad there in terms of how other people judge them, and how can we as a community make sure that they have a soft place to land and soft families, soft arms, soft, you know, communities to land in, which also I will say like the Black queer community is out here, you know, showing out and showing up and loving each other and leading the way in so many different ways. So like, you know, how do we follow that really?
Yeah. Thank you. I'm just worried that I'm running out of time and I still have so much that I want to talk about. So a lot of the time I struggle with the fact that like we have all talked about how like as a Black person you are expected to do more, you are expected to take on more and or whatnot. And in some situations you come to a space and they expect you to be the spokesperson for all Black people and be the one who has the knowledge of like, because in a lot of white people spaces, Black people are a monolith and one Black person has knowledge of every Black person. And my question is like, how do we, and also I also have a question because I'm going to try to combine this question because of course the term EDI after George Floyd thing became the whole buzzword. And to be honest, if you get offered something as a Black person in a racist society that hasn't or given you shit through EDI, you should, sorry, I'm swearing already. You should take it. You should take it. However, a lot of the time we are also expected to be the face of the EDI, and that's a lot of burden. So my question is, who should be responsible for like the whole fight against anti-Black racism? Who should take up that work? Because it is exhausting. Like it's not something that is like something you are dissociated from. Because if you're advocating for something that affects you personally, it takes a lot of emotional extra burden on you. So who should be responsible, and how do people come into that work and in a safe, and because I have also seen anti-Black racism groups that because of the harm that the society has given to Black people, you know, lateral violence starts going on even within the group. So how do we navigate that? Yes.
So I think in a simple answer to one of your questions in there in terms of who should, I think who should technically be like particularly the sort of quote unquote liberal whites who pretend to care. Like they should be the ones to do it. However, and like maybe I'm opening another thread here, and this is just a thread that I've been fascinated by recently. The backlash is happening. Like EDI is now kind of a dirty word in a lot of circles, and like and you know, EDI pilots is just another way of saying, you know, racial epithet pilot, or you know, all this different shit that's happening now. And so, and again, maybe this is my own pessimism. I don't, even the non-Black folks, particularly the white folks, again, this is a white supremacy, who say, you know, kind of like we want racial equality in our society. Personally, I think the backlash is kind of on all parts. Like I think that there's the people who are being vocally against EDI and all this stuff, and the people who are like, well, I kind of agree. And so I'm just going to take this as my chance to fade into the background and not do stuff. And therefore, I think that while the people who should be doing it are the people in power who are the beneficiaries of this white supremacist setup of these different institutions, and who say they want something different, I think they should do it. However, I don't have faith that they will. I don't think they ever will. And so, unfortunately, I do think that's gonna continue being us and the people who do have firsthand experience with it doing it. But for your follow-up question about how we do that in a sustainable and healthy way, I have no idea.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that you mentioned that I, kind of remembered is like we were having a conversation on like liberals and conservatives, and we are like, you know what? If you really look at this thing, these are the same people. It's just that one pretend to care, the other one is like, I don't really care. So like sometimes it's better to even look at those people who say they don't really care, and oh, these are not my people, like I should avoid them, than people who you think really care and they talk about how they care about black people, but in reality that's not the case. Ash.
I think Nmesoma hit the nail on the head. First of all, that moment of reckoning that we all, I laugh about it. I'm like, after George Floyd's murder, I got a whole bunch of money from UFC because they were just giving me white guilt money. And I took it. I was like, yeah, fine, that's fine. But let's not pretend what it is. You're making up names here for awards. So I took it. But I think we know the realistic position of what it is. The white people will sit at the table and make decisions for us. Like it's regardless. And they'll sit there and they'll be like, oh, we'll do targeted black hiring, or, we'll do like 15,000 events for Black History Month, or we'll start acknowledging, Emancipation Day. But I think from a militant kind of perspective, it's on us. Like, I think we also have to have these conversations are great and everything, but we're still siloed in academia, right? Like, I think one of the biggest disconnects is that we don't have means to talk to people on the ground. And I know we all do it in our different kind of components, but there's got to be a larger way of us actually connecting with people and saying, this is what actually needs to occur. And, it's a kind of cliche statement, but the system works. The system works for white people. It doesn't work for us. It was never built to represent us. And, the individuals who are in the system, I think of professors at York who are, black women again, who are fighting within the system. That takes a lot of strength to do. It's easy to sit here and be like, let's burn it all down and restart it again. But yeah, I think white people are going to make a decision at the table. They're going to sit there and do their EDI thing till who knows when. But I think we need to somehow force ourselves into the door to make them have those harder conversations.
Thank you. Vena.
I have so many thoughts based on what Arshad was saying. Timi and Nmesoma is just a very fascinating conversation. But about the backlash against EDI, we've all probably heard it. I don't want to speak for you guys, but I've heard conversations where you're in an institution or an organization that's hiring, and they're like, well, there was this really qualified candidate that didn't get the job, obviously because he's a white man, and white men are not in fashion right now. And so you get these insidious comments from people that, you like and you respect. And you go, whoa, that's how you really feel, So I don't know. I am not, like both of you said, I'm not very optimistic as to, people who are benefiting from the system taking on the extra burden of addressing the system's failures. I'm not super optimistic about that happening anytime soon. And I tend to want to focus on, I do agree with Nmesoma that the term white supremacy is very apt, and it's the one that we should be using. I also feel like maybe the most effective and potentially the most protective strategy moving forward would be to decenter white spaces and decenter white people, and focus on our communities, non-Black, non-white communities, also going across the academia silos and talking directly to people in other different disciplines, people on the ground, people in communities, and just focusing and centering their voices, centering their opinions, their skill sets, and just not worrying about justifying the need to do it, just doing it, not making an argument for this is why we should talk to community members, this is why we should talk to non-white people, you just do it. And then eventually some of these attitudes and some of these practices will permeate the space, and then you won't have to justify it so much. This is what I'm thinking about in my own work and my own research. I do think a lot about, I work in global health, which is involved in a lot of international aid for development, a lot of international aid for health to countries like Haiti, countries in the Caribbean, countries in Africa, where people talk a lot, like they're very proud of their recognition of the colonial legacy of international, like what they used to call tropical medicine. And so in global health, we're supposed to be, I know it's supposed to be a dirty word now, but they're supposed to be the woke tropical medicine where, we recognize the structural effects of racism and colonialism and imperialism. And that's what defines the discipline. That's what sets it apart from its precursors that were more informed by racist ideologies. But you look at the field and the people in positions of power, the people with decision-making power are still very much white Anglo-Saxon people. And so they go into a country like Burkina Faso or Mali or Bangladesh, and who's leading the teams? Who's making the decisions? Who's deciding on health agendas for these countries? There are people from North American institutions, European institutions, usually it's white men, white women, and the underlings are hired at the local level, but they don't have decision-making power. And so there's this language that's adopted, this discourse that wants to be very progressive and wants to be very aware of the structural inequalities that have led us to this point in time in history. But it's not accompanied by any tangible changes in the structure of the people in power. And there's real repercussions on communities that are affected by health interventions when the people who make the decisions don't know the contextual reality on the ground, and they come in with the expert tag. They have the technical expertise, they have the scientific expertise, and so you have to listen to us. And so I think about in my own work how that manifests in Haiti. A lot of the people who decide on national budgets for AIDS interventions, it's people from the World Bank, it's people from like these big multilateral organizations. Sometimes they're not Black. Sometimes they are Black, but they're very much white supremacist, And so in my own practice, I'm trying to be very, very careful on whose opinion and whose experiences I center. When I write about my research, when I talk about my research, who am I putting at the forefront? Whose work am I highlighting? And whose words I'm trying to focus in when I'm doing my research. So trying to go at the community level, trying to go to people who are on the ground, trying to go to people who have a real understanding of the contextual factors that affect their own lives, and not worrying about justifying why I'm doing that. I'm just going to do it. And then hopefully more people will catch on with time and try to emulate that.
Thank you, Vena. I wanted to add something, like when you mentioned that sometimes they are Black people, but they are still the face of white supremacy. Because in recent time, the face of white supremacy is not always white people. It's Black and brown people who white people have pushed up to an extent to use them to still do the same harm that they've been doing, because they don't want to do the dirty job anymore. So they still use us to, perpetuate the same thing.
Yeah, not all skin folk are kinfolk,
Yeah.
And I just wanted to add, with the question that you asked, when I'm being asked to sit on a committee, I first ask, what is my power there? Am I being asked to come and ask the face? Am I being tokenized in that space? Are you going to listen to me or not? So those are the things I think about. And I agree with Vena, like my work is all about community. So I'm not, if I'm going to be in a space and have to justify to you like why I'm there or why I do things a certain way, that's no use of my time. And I'm very, very like, for me, like important thing to me is my peace of mind and my safety. So I'm not going to, because I'm not paid for this work. That's another thing. Like, pay people to do that work. Like, there are people that go to school to do the EDIA things. Pay them to do that work. If I'm going to be on a committee, you're going to take my time and I'm going to volunteer for it. It depends. It depends on how much power I have. If I'm going to be able to create actual positive change in that position, yes. If I'm going to be tokenized there, I can go to bed and sleep. I'm a PhD student. I have things to do.
Yeah. Finally, Ash, we're out of time.
Okay, I actually have a question for all four. So I mean, I'm a historian, so I work with information from the past. Yeah, I do oral histories, but you know, when I was at York, a big thing used to occur where York would constantly, I mean, I love the school, but it's in a very impoverished neighborhood, right? So York would constantly be trying to go out into the community to better the community. So considering all of you are very much, involved with community and research that way, how do you navigate the extractive policies of the institution? Like, how do you make sure that, like everything we talked about, how do you talk about, like, eliminate decentralization of Black people or look for the one characteristic of Black people? I'm actually just curious on how all of you navigate that.
I could try to go.
Okay.
I can just say what I'm trying. This is not, like, I haven't figured it out yet, but I'm trying to figure it out. For me, it goes through language a lot. I'm trying, when I do research in an area, to always make sure that I plan enough time for restitution, like to bring back the results of the research to the community and make sure that, they feel very much involved in the process and that you're giving it back to them and they can use that information for themselves. And I do research on Haiti mostly, so the work comes through language. That's like my big, I guess, strategy is making sure I translate my results in Creole. Because I've worked in a lot of spaces where, you have a collaborative team, you have researchers from London, researchers from Boston, people from like Washington, in Haiti, in a village in Haiti, and they have meetings in English and French. And then you do the research, you do your big multi-week project, multi-year project. At the end, you plan for a meeting. That's what we do. We go to the community where we took the data, and we invite a bunch of community leaders, stakeholders to come in. And we say, like, we were here for 2 years doing this work, and these are the results. The presentation's in French. And I'm like, well, a lot of those people, their language, the language they're most comfortable with is Creole. So I've been in meetings, in restitution meetings, where you're sitting here giving the presentation and you can see the eyes glaze over, like they want to be here, they want to know the information, but they're not getting it. And so I made a decision a couple of years back of like, I'm not doing those meetings in French. I'm sorry. Like, I'm doing them in Creole. And then you can find someone to help you figure out what I'm saying, but I'm talking to the community.
Yep.
And the difference was huge. I'm telling you, huge. Like, in the response from the room and the engagement from the room, and they felt like, okay, you are talking to us. You took the time to do this. And so it's something that I'm moving forward. I don't care how much time or how much money it takes. I'm doing that. It's going to be a priority for me. And I've had like people say to me, like, do you want to do all that extra work of like translating stuff? Like, it's a lot of extra work. I'm like, no, it's worth it. It's worth the extra work. It's worth the extra time and resources to do it. And then if I have to pick only one language, I'll do it in Creole. And you pay for like Depot or something and translate it. I won't do it for you. And yeah, that's my big thing moving forward.
Yeah. we have run out of time, but I'm going to try to say something about Ash's question and then close us off. So, like, for me, one of the biggest shock that I received the first time I tried to do research with displaced people in Nigeria was like I got to the camp, I would talk with them, and like when I start talking about my research, they switch off. And then I tried to find out why they were switching off. What I got was that a lot of researchers have come here and promised them heaven and earth and get data from them and disappear, and that's it. Right? So for me, I always start with the first thing is to tell the people I'm working with the capacity of what I can do as a person and as a researcher, being sincere and not promise them what I cannot do just to get them to be part of what I'm doing, right? So I try to be sincere with what I can do. That is number one. And then to add to what Vena said, I've also had situations where like we finish doing a research, we write a paper, and like I've had encounters. One was like in our methodology, we said we used mud ball. And the journal was like, what is mud ball? Say snowball. And we are like, no, there's no snow in Nigeria. Like, we are not writing for Westerners. And we have had situations where we had pushback, where there would be like, what is the relevance of this research to the international community? And I'm like, this research is for Nigerians to consume, not for international community. Like a lot of the time when a research is done in the US, they don't question the international relevance. It's specific for the US. But when I do the same for Nigerians to consume, they want me to talk about the international relevance of the research. And there have been situations where like we write something that the West do not relate to, and they're like, oh, this is not possible. This is not real, stuff like that. So we've had this back and forth with regards to the work we do. But like for me, I'm always like, I'm going to keep, like if the journal does not want to accept it, they should just reject it. But I'm not going to change what I've written. Or situations where, because sometimes like in our languages, there is a lot of use of proverbs. And I believe that every time I translate proverbs to English, it loses its value. The meat is gone. So I usually put the proverb in my language, and then I try to put the water down for anybody who wants to understand the interpretation. And sometimes they are like, you should remove and I'm always saying no to that. So I think it's just how we have to keep doing like what we can do at our level. So, and because I'm so sorry, I don't have time anymore. And I wanted something that came to my mind is that we were just talking about how we've been we are taking advantage of black labor without getting, like, black women especially getting paid for the extra work that they are doing. But exactly what did I just do now? I brought a bunch of black women and a black man to discuss this evocative topic and share their expertise and their brilliance. And I am not paying them for the work they are just doing right now. Well, if thou sees this video and decide that you guys deserve to get paid, they should let me know and I would send you your money immediately. Thank you. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to turn off the video and then the recording, and then we can chat.